My name is Carol DePotney. I'm the programs librarian for Orcas Island Library, and I'm so delighted with the weather this evening. This is perfect. This is what I had envisioned for the South Lawn, and we did order heaters, so even if it's a little cooler out, we still should be able to use this space in future, which is superb. I am happy to announce that we have next week, same time, 6 o'clock, on South Lawn, weather permitting, Carolyn Crusoe will be doing a concert. And then in early May, May 5th, Thursday at 6, we have Sasha LaPointe joining us, an author, a Native American author, punk rocker, who wrote a book, an autobiography recently called Red Paint. And so she'll be here to speak. And then the Sunday after that, we have Amanda Swinimer from British Columbia, wrote a book about kelp. Super cool. So lots of great stuff going on, and then even more stuff in May. Keep your eyes peeled to the website, and you'll learn all about it. This evening, however, I am thankful to the Friends of the Library for enabling us to do all these programs, and I'm grateful to Iris for coming over from Lopez. I'm told that she's a frequent fairy flyer with 4 fabulous books. Wasn't that nice?
Very nice.
Yes, thank you. All of which can be found at the library. Hiking Naked, a Quaker Woman Search Writer in a Life of Life Fest, which she'll be speaking about this evening, Essays from the Salish Sea. Bounty, Lopez Island Farms, Food and Community, and Hands that Work, portraits and profiles of people who work with their hands. So, I will try and keep the dinging to a minimum. How successful I'll be, but just remember that the person who dings in is someone else joining this event, which is good news. And with that, I'll hand it over to Iris.
Dinging. Oh, dinging.
Yes, it's the joining Zoom.
Can we silence this joint?
Yeah, I'll be muting everyone.
Okay.
Am I set up here okay for the?
Yes, you are, and I'm going to spotlight you for everyone so that you are the main event.
Right.
And I will keep letting people come in as we go. Let me shut that down for a minute. Okay.
All right. Wow. Well, thank you all for coming. And thank you, Carol, for arranging for the weather. Well done. I had asked Darcy to help out with that too. So between the two of you,
We got to cover.
yeah. But thank you for the invitation to be here.
Yes.
And thank you to Jenny and Darvels for being here to sell books. I'd like to begin these events with a land acknowledgement because I wrote a land acknowledgement for this book, which I hadn't done in any of my other books, and but it seemed fitting since many of the essays in this journal or this collection were drafted while I was on the Salish Sea. And so I wanted to write an acknowledgement of America's first people. So I'll just begin with that since we're all here on the Salish Sea. I acknowledge I reside on the ancestral lands and waters of Coast Salish peoples who have called this place home and cared for it from time immemorial. I wrote these essays on traditional lands and waters of Coast Salish tribes. I express my deepest respect and gratitude for these original and current caregivers and healers of this region. I also acknowledge the disposition of indigenous lands was often taken by coercive and violent acts and the disregard of treaties. I regret the harm done to First Nations people by colonizers, of which I'm a part. For that, I extend sincere apologies, and I pledge to work toward reconciliation. So again, I want to express my thanks to all of you for coming this evening. And also to Tom Rawson, who's joining us remotely. I always like to express my appreciation to Homebound Publications, the publisher, small press that published this book and Hiking Naked, and Leslie Browning, who's the founder of that press. I also want to thank the crew of the Inner Island Ferry. And today was the first time I had ridden the Inner Island, I think, since the pandemic. And it's an all different crew. I know that some of the crew who were working then still are, but the time that I was on the ferry today, none of them were there. And the galley was all shuttered, so it was kind of bittersweet. But I plan to ride again sometime when I know that, especially Suzanne and Terry, who you'll hear about later, figure prominently in this collection. I'm hoping I can catch a time when they are there and leave a copy for the crew. They've treated me very well. And I also thank all who work to protect the Salish Sea, which includes all of you here, I'm sure. So the plan for this evening is I'm going to read some excerpts. Tom is going to sing at least one song. I'm hoping I can get him to do two. We never did confirm that.
Yeah, I sent you a text message.
Oh.
I'm just going to do the WSF song.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. He'll be a little bit later in the program when we need things lightened up. And then we can have some question and answer. So in the introduction, I think is always a good place to start. And I know some of you have maybe already started reading the book, but for others of you, this may be all you know about it is what you read in the posts and the news about the book. So I'll begin with an excerpt from the book's introduction. As an islander, I spend considerable hours on the Salish Sea, sometimes in a kayak, but primarily on the Washington State ferries, the largest ferry system in the nation and third largest in the world. The fleet carries nearly 25 million people a year through some of the most majestic scenery on Earth. While ferries are my connection to the mainland, the Inner Island route travels among only 4 islands in the San Juans. You all know this part. Over the years, that circuit has supplied time and space for me to write. During the spring of 2017, my concerns about climate change in general and the health of the Salish Sea in particular grew. I wasn't alone. People throughout the islands and indeed the world were becoming increasingly aware of the threat of ecological disasters. I'd studied the effects of warming waters and sea level rise. I knew southern resident killer whales neared extinction due to toxins and plastics in the water, vessel noise, and a 60% reduction in their main source of nutrition, Chinook or king salmon. I'd seen evidence of sea star wasting. I'd read that 30% of birds and 38% of mammals are listed as threatened, endangered, or candidates for these designations. I'd written agencies and government officials to urge them to prevent the risks of spills from increased oil transit. I became certain it was time to focus my writing on protecting and preserving the water and life that surrounded my home. Doing some of that writing while drifting on the Salish Sea would undoubtedly influence and enhance my work. Thoughts of a year-long writing residency on the inter-island ferry surfaced as a way to do my small part to protect this ferocious, fragile place. I floated the idea with a retired ferryboat captain and member of the Ferry Advisory Committee. He encouraged me to develop a proposal and submit it to a contact of his in the Washington State ferry system. My proposal outlined the overall goal, a book-length collection of personal essays. I anticipated exploring history and details about the Inner Island route and the MV Tillicum, and describing the Salish Sea and the effects of climate change on it and southern resident killer whales. The structure of the Inner Island residency was simple. I planned to walk onto the ferry on Lopez Island with my laptop, journal, and research materials, and then ride, write, and read along the route. There would be no cost to me or the ferry system, As you all know, the inner island is the only route that allows walk-on passengers to ride free. Although I learned that there were some workers in the Washington State Ferries who didn't know that. And at a meeting of various officials, when they talked about this, somebody said, well, she's got to pay, right? She didn't know that we don't pay to walk on the inner island. From August 1st, 2018 until August 30th, 2019, I served as the Washington State Ferry System's first writer-in-residence on the Inter-Island Ferry. A crisp white table tent with my name in black lettering and the WSF logo in blue identified me and my role. It took far longer than one term to complete this book, but many pieces had their beginnings at a table on the MV Tillicum, floating, sometimes pitching port to starboard, past rocky shorelines, snowy mountain ridges, forests of cedars, firs, and madrones, mansions and mobile homes. Seagull and eagle calls, briny wind currents, and tingling sea breezes stimulated my senses. This is a collection of nonfiction essays written not by a scientist or a marine biologist, but by a storytelling lover of the Salish Sea. Most of the essays are in a form sometimes referred to as lyric. I use techniques of both prose and poetry to explore the topics I might not otherwise approach, and to lead readers to ask questions. I offer them as symbols of resilience, inspiration, and hope. So this was a very different form for me writing this book. My memoir was a long form narrative. The two previous books were collections of profiles of people. I felt that I wanted to try some different forms, partly because there was so much that I didn't know about the Salish Sea, and there was so much that I care very deeply about, as I know all of you do. And I questioned many, many times over the nearly 4 years that I was working on it, whether it was really right for me to be doing this, because, you know, my first career was as a nurse, and then I had written these other books. I did not have a scientific background, but I felt compelled to do that. But that didn't stop me from fretting throughout the process, and really questioning if I had anything different to say or anything that would be helpful. So, as I often do when I have big questions, I wrote. And I wrote about those questions as I did in the collection's title essay, and I'm going to read a bit from that. It's called Writer in a Life Vest. A crew member called out as the Tillicum sat in the berth in Friday Harbor after all the passengers had disembarked. "The writer is still on board," she said. "It's Iris," another replied. "Iris is the writer." I left the table where I usually wrote on the ferry to find crew members Terry and Suzanne discussing my presence. "We're going to have a fire drill," Suzanne said. "Just wanted to warn you." A few seconds later, a bell sounded, a long jangle, lower in tone than a classic telephone ring, and about 10 decibels louder. I returned to my writing spot to watch what would unfold. Terry trotted to a passenger bench near the outdoor deck and lifted the vinyl-covered seat. She pulled 2 orange life vests from the stash and walked toward me. "You can be my guinea pig," she said, handing me one of the vests. As she donned the other, she instructed me to loosen the side straps on mine, remove my glasses, slide the vest over my head, and tug the straps for a snug fit. "If you ever have to jump into the water," she explained, "hold on to the top of the vest so it doesn't ride up, and cross your legs at the ankles." I gulped, then mimicked her actions in the cabin as I watched a spray of water shoot out of a fire hose over the ferry's port side. "Bring your knees to your chest to conserve energy," Terry continued. "Or if you see a log, you could drape your knees over it." I nodded silently and swallowed again. After Terry took a photo, I removed the bright, beefy life-saving equipment, grateful this was only a drill. Wearing that vest, I felt a combination of peril and protection. 3 shorter, echoing jangles signaled the drill's conclusion. If we have a real emergency, Terry said, you can help. As I returned to my desk, Suzanne strode through the cabin, dressed in full firefighting gear, yellow helmet with a plastic face shield, bulky yellow jacket and pants, thick gloves, and black boots. She'd been wielding the fire hose on the upper deck. We do these drills once a week, she explained, perspiration glistening her face. I thought of the varied kinds of vulnerability Terry, Suzanne, and I can feel in our work. They put their lives at risk when there's a fire or some other emergency on board. When I write, particularly personal essays, my risk is different, but present nonetheless. Often my heart feels especially unprotected, as if it's covered with only the thinnest layer of skin and no sternum. Most writers I know describe the same sense of bearing heart and soul. Every time I wrote on the Tillicum or in my home office, fears about the imperiled Salish Sea stalked me. The deaths in 2018 of 2 southern resident orcas, J50 Scarlet and a calf born to J35 Tahlequah, brought worldwide attention to the impact of pollution, noise, and diminishing food sources on these mammals. Tahlequah gave birth to a healthy male calf, J57 Phoenix, in September 2020. However, the mortality rate for infants is 50% due to high levels of toxins in whale mothers' breast milk. Like the spotted owl, endangered by over-harvesting old-growth forests, the potential extinction of orca whales demands protection by humans, as well as a halt to our damaging behaviors. I'm no marine biologist, but I'm compelled to use my art to write about the sea, the threats to its survival, and the protection measures many people still resist. Still, I couldn't help asking myself whether I had the authority to write about these issues. Sometimes I've yearned for a bulletproof vest, like actor Nathan Fillion's in the television show Castle. Fillion played Rick Castle, a novelist and part-time detective with NYPD. Whenever Castle joined the real detectives on a criminal investigation, he zipped up a black vest emblazoned with the word writer in white letters. After the fire drill on the ferry, I recalled the snug fit of that life vest and imagined it giving me the confidence to expose my beliefs, fears, angers, and joys on the page. We're in a real emergency, Terry, and Terry said I could help. Truth is, the climate crisis endangers everyone, and we all need metaphorical life vests. I hope mine will sustain me to foster hope and give me the courage to speak. Southern resident whales, Chinook salmon, rockfish, anemones, urchins, sea stars, puffins, marbled murrelets. They're as desperate for life vests as we are. How many of you remember writing essays in high school and college, English comp classes? Well, I'm happy to say that the literary essay, I think, has come a long way, baby, I guess. Flash nonfiction hybrid forms have really grown in popularity in this form of essay. And I've been studying and experimenting with these different forms for a few years. That form has given me a nice break from long form narrative, such as in my memoir, Hiking Naked. But I think these times call for some experimenting and some short forms. I think many of us are accustomed to, reading things much shorter forms, and there are many more avenues for that kind of writing too. So I think that there's some power for these short pieces. And writing this way also gave me a new way to enter into some of the distressing aspects of the climate crisis. The essay form is one to use to try to make sense of something. That's what the root of that word is. And I was trying to figure out a lot about the Salish Sea. I took the Marine Naturalist Training Program through the Whale Museum and just read so much and, listened to podcasts and studied a lot because I really had a lot to learn, and I was trying to make sense of and understand what was happening with the Salish Sea. So one of the different forms that I used was a piece called Salish Sea Account, because as I was doing all this studying, I was coming across just unbelievable numbers, accounting of the Salish Sea and what's happening to the sea and to the life in the sea. And I'm a word person, not a number person. And I was just trying to wrap my head around some of these things that I was reading. And I felt that I needed words and numbers to try to convey the dangers to the Salish Sea. And I felt we needed to have an account of what's happening. So, I looked up account. It could be a noun, it could be a verb. There's other forms of it, accountable. So the more I thought about it, I just felt like I really needed something that was strong visually and that would somehow give some form to all these numbers. There was a call for essays and poems for an anthology published here on orcas by Jill McCabe Johnson called For Love of Orcas. And so I just used that as an impetus to try this form and this piece. Can't see it super well from here, but those who have the book on page 66. The other thing is I liked the visual of each line starts with a numerical, a number, not a word, and then interspersed with some of these words that I also gave the definition for. So I'm going to read an excerpt from Salish Sea Account. And it begins with an epigraph by Greta Thunberg, the Swedish activist. Greta says, "Every single person counts, just like every single emission counts, every single kilo, everything counts." Account, noun, report, story, log, tally, balance sheet, debt. 7,000 square miles, the total marine area of the Salish Sea. These inland waters include Washington State's Puget Sound, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, the San Juan Islands, and the Strait of Georgia. 8 million people live and work beside the Salish Sea. 76 southern resident killer whales, orcas, live in J, K, and L pods in the Salish Sea as of 2/18/21, down from 86 when they were first listed as endangered in 2005. And as you all know, now there are 74. 30 Chinook salmon are typical in an orca's daily diet. J35, also known as Tahlequah, is a 20-year-old orca whose newborn calf survived for only 30 minutes on 7/24/18. 17, the number of days Tahlequah carried the 400-pound body of her dead calf through the sea. 1,000 miles, the distance Tahlequah traveled the Salish Sea with her pod due to as a consequence of. 3, main threats to southern residents. Insufficient salmon, toxic water. Lower Snake River and peak Chinook salmon migration. $30,000 adult salmon and steelhead returned to the Snake River to spawn in the 1950s. In 2017, there were less than 10,000. $3.6 billion US spent by the Canadian government to buy Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain Pipeline. The goal to expand transport of low-grade tar sands oil from Alberta, Canada to refineries in Northwest Washington. 7 times more oil tankers, each holding 25 million gallons of tar sands oil mixed with volatile organic liquids, including benzene, will travel the Salish Sea if the Trans Mountain Pipeline expands. 0 chance to clean up tar sands oil and protect first responders and marine life from toxic chemicals when tankers spill. Accountable, adjective, responsible, liable, comprehensible, understandable. 1, Canadian Federal Court of Appeal overturned approval of Trans Mountain Oil Pipeline expansion because the federal government failed to adequately consult First Nations. 44, state, tribal, provincial, and federal officials served on Washington Governor Inslee's Southern Resident Orca Task Force. After 2 years of work in 2019, the task force presented 49 recommendations that will lead to better water quality, a healthier ecosystem, and more robust salmon runs. They dedicated the final report to Tahlequah and to the 2 new orca capsules. Countless. The efforts to pay our overdue debt to Tahlequah per cap in the Salish Sea. I had the most unbelievable experience when I was at Village Books last week. I read that there was that one Canadian Federal Court of Appeal that overturned the approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and an attorney who was involved with that appeal was there. He just happened to be in Bellingham from Vancouver and happened to see this event was happening and came. And he was sitting in the back of the room. I didn't know who he was. And he came up to me afterwards and said that he had been involved in the negotiations for that. So I got to thank him personally. So I did try to find some ways to lighten things up a bit, and you'll find a number of, I think, fun and lighthearted pieces, like the one Jammin' on the Salish Sea about the ukulele jam that happens or was happening. Anita, has it been?
Yeah, we're waiting to it.
Yeah.
Comfortable there.
Well, you can read that essay and get a little feel for that. That was pretty fun to experience and to write about. And I think that songs do that for us too. They help to lighten things. I mean, if something is put into a song, even if it's a very heavy, sad, heartbreaking story that's being told in the song, it often does have that effect of lightening things for us a little bit. And so I decided to, well, I had an experience of being stranded on San Juan Island when there was a big ice storm, and the ferry landing at Lopez froze and they couldn't land. So I was stranded for a while on San Juan, and it reminded me of, remember the old MTA song, Will He Ever Return? You know,
Yes.
the man on the MTA. And I am no singer or songwriter, but I know that a lot of songwriters do borrow tunes and form from other songs. And so I decided to write a song about that experience I had, because I did have my wondered throughout the evening if I would ever return back home. So I just parodied that song, the MTA song, we call it the WSF song. My dear friend Tom, singer-songwriter Tom, I asked him if he would sing it and play the music. I said, well, first I said, I know it's not quite musically, rhythmically right, but do you think you could do it? He said, yeah, I think I can. So he hopefully is going to join us
Can you do it now?
and sing it.
Okay.
He's ready.
What page is it on?
Oh, it's on page 47. Yeah. And you see, I I listed for the epigraph, I have the refrain from the MTA song, which was written by Jacqueline Steiner and Bess Lomax Hawes. And then you can see how I adapted that for my purposes. So
I'm afraid to turn the screen because it will sail across the lawn. So you can sort of see Tom there. And I'm going to turn this around so Tom can see you and pretend he's actually playing to the audience in person. There we go.
All right, can you hear it?
So Tom, go ahead and give us a few bars to make sure the sound's okay.
Plenty of banjo.
Great.
At some point in the chorus,
Let me tell
Go,
you.
Charlie!
oh, that's great. Yes. You know,
So do we say go Iris?
well, I don't know. All
right.
We'll have to have our song leader direct us if he wants us to do that.
All right, Tom, ready when you
I
are.
might just knock the whole screen over.
Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Go, Tom.
Well, let me tell you a story about a rider named Iris who boarded the ferry one wintry morn. She rode and she rode until the third island stopped when she started to feel a bit worn. Will she ever return? Will she ever return? For her Lopez home she'll yearn. She may ride forever round the San Juan Island. She's the rider who never returned. She didn't pay a fare, walking on and off is free. She could ride and ride all day. But at San Juan Island she was feeling pretty hungry, so she trudged to the Bean Cafe. Will she ever return? Will she ever return? For her Lopez home she'll yearn. She may ride forever around the San Juan Island. She's the rider who never returned. A waiter told the rider while she lunched at the Bean, ice has frozen the Lopez dock. Then the rider's heart skipped several beats as she felt a wave of shock. Will she ever return? Will she ever return? For her Lopez home she'll yearn. She may ride forever around the San Juan Island. She's the rider who never returned. Washington State Ferry sent an email alert that repairs would likely take all night. So Iris called some friends on San Juan Island. The kind souls prepared a bed and a bite. Will she ever return? Will she ever return? For her Lopez home she'll yearn. She may ride forever around the San Juan Island. She's the rider who never returned. A midnight alert said the Lopez dock was working and a ferry would be coming right by. So her friends drove her to the boat and she let out a grateful sigh. Will she ever return? Will she ever return? For her Lopez home she'll yearn. Ride forever on the San Juan Island. She's the rider who never returned. Now you island dwellers who travel by ferry, don't forget you must come prepared. Pack a toothbrush and chargers for all your devices in case your vessel becomes impaired. Will she ever return? Will she ever return? For her Lopez home she'll yearn. They ride forever around the San Juan Island. She's the rider who never returned. 1 week later, snowfall covered the islands, but the ferries continued to churn. Iris took another chance as writer in residence. She's the writer who always returns. Will she ever return? Will she ever return for her boldness? She'll yearn. She ride forever on the San Juan Islands. She's the writer who always returns.
Gosh, thank you, Tom. This is the first I haven't heard this sung. I just sing it in my head, but it's just not the same. That was fantastic. Thank you, Tom. I hope your voice recovers.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, you see that worked. That lightened the tone after all those numbers, right? Oh my gosh, that was so great.
So is your smile during it.
Oh. Well, it's just so different to hear it, you
Yeah.
know. And I am not a songwriter nor a poet. I mean, trying to rhyme and have something that would fit, you know, with the meters that was a real challenge for me. Fortunately, there is a singer-songwriter in my writing group who helped me out, but now I really got the truth. So, another form that I used to spring some lightness and hope to this collection was with some profiles. I wrote some imagined and real conversations. So I interviewed some people, and I'll read one of those in a moment. And then I also imagined interviewing Rachel Carson, and I had to reverse engineer the questions because her responses I used her own writings, and so I had to, you know, if there was something she had written that I felt like, oh, I really want to include this, and I had to figure out what question could I ask her if she were here to do that. And then so that was a posthumous how do you say that again? Posthumous interview with Rachel Carson. And then I had an imagined conversation between Rachel Carson, Greta Thunberg, and me. And again, for them, I used things either that they had written themselves or that had been written about them. It's really quite impressive to be reminded of just how prescient Rachel Carson was. But it was a fun way to deal with some pretty heavy material. So the profiles, I met and read about so many people, so I really like the form of the profile as a way to tell other people's stories, or really have them tell their own stories. So I'm going to read an excerpt from one of those by somebody that I'm sure some of you know very well. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here tonight because of his work taking him elsewhere, but it's called Wild Sea Doctor. In YouTube videos by veterinarian Joseph K. Gatos, you'll often hear him say, "It's wild." Have any of you seen those, the Sea Doc videos? In every one of them, at some point, he'll say, "It's wild." The series, produced by the Sea Doc Society, is aptly named Salish Sea Wild. No surprise, that's where you'll find Joe, a vet with a specialty in wild animal health. Since 2000, the Sea Doc Society has conducted and sponsored scientific research in this ecosystem that offers plenty to study. 37 species of mammals, 172 types of birds, 253 species of fish, and more than 3,000 varieties of invertebrates. As science director, Joe looks for projects that impact policy or wildlife management. He says, "I follow the questions and problems, talk to experts, and get them together to talk about action. We do projects where information will help us move toward a healthy ecosystem. It's not just about whales, but also people, economics, and where we make our investments. That's where science meets policy. Joe also worked with others at CDOC on the first ever attempt to treat a sick killer whale, J50 Scarlet, in the spring of 2018. We had started to think about what we do with an entangled whale or a whale with infection. We've done this kind of care with gorillas for decades, Joe said, referring to CDOC's sister program, Gorilla Doctors. When it came to Scarlet, though, the public was all over the place, Joe says. Half said we should quit experimenting, and the other half said we had to do more. Despite reviewing her history, visual and behavioral assessments, and evaluation of breath and fecal samples, Joe and other scientists never identified a cause for Scarlet's sickness. Consequently, their care focused on administering medications to treat potential secondary infections, such as bacterial pneumonia and parasites. Sadly, the treatment didn't work for Scarlet. She died that fall. However, Joe finds much in his work that sustains his hope. I love the animals, being in the water, under the water, thinking about them and helping them, he says. And the people I get to work with, I've learned so much from all of them. It's amazing to be part of something bigger than yourself. I asked Joe about the successes he's most proud of in his work. I think a lot of the stuff I've been able to do, he pauses and tears up. It's not me, but a lot of people. Joe takes a deep breath. Persistence, he continues, and still moving ahead in the face of fear. That's the biggest thing for me. Have the guts to go forward, and if you make a mistake, apologize and go again. Don't be afraid to try something. If it doesn't work, don't beat yourself up. Make a new plan. I wish I had interviewed him like in the first year that I was working on this project, because I was scared of making a lot of mistakes. So that's a little bit from Joe. It's a much longer profile, and I learned a lot about Joe. I had known him, but it was really great to learn more of his history and how he came to this work. So for my last excerpt, I want to read this piece in celebration of J37, Haishka, which is a straight Salish word meaning blessing or thank you, and J59, that's Haishka's baby, who was first seen March 1st. And as far as I know, I have not been able to find out if that whale has been named beyond the scientific name. And this piece comes in the last section of the book called, section is on hope. And I've written in 4 short parts. It's called Lessons. There are 4 lessons. Each one is very short. I numbered them. And they are the title of the piece is Lessons. 1, our time. On the first vessel run of the Inter-Island this autumn day, I gather with deckhands in the ferry galley after the final trucks and cars are loaded. Some of the crew pump steaming coffee out of a tall black thermos on the counter. Talk today is about enjoying the quiet of the morning now that the tourists have returned home and most of the drivers and walk-ons are regulars. This is our time now. And I feel that sense of entitlement. 2, ownership. I fuss and fume silently over the sense of ownership, and I wonder, what does the sea own? Why do we put any thought into owning when it's just here, available and necessary for us, although we aren't so necessary for it, except now that we've destroyed so much of the life below and above the waterline. 3, imagination. In my imagination, I follow you, Ursinus, Orca, as you dive deeper into the sea than I've ever been before, into a darkness darker than I've ever known. So dark I can barely see your white eye patch gleaming against your silky black skin, and I can only feel the other creatures under the water, swimming with you and with me. Creatures you know well, but I'm just getting to know, even though they're here all the time, at least for now. 4, renewal. In the Tillicum's main cabin, signs with red letters and diagrams explain the steps in case of an emergency. For the Salish Sea and for us, the emergency alarm has already been sounded. We need to take lessons from the orcapods, travel together in tight groups, some swimming and diving ahead in search of food to pass along to those with fewer reserves. Sleep together in a cove in moonlight. Celebrate being back together after a time apart. Carry our dead as long as we need to, mourn their loss, and then somehow return to frolic. And maybe feel a glimmer of renewal, of hope to carry on. So. So if people think you can hang in there in this chill a little bit longer, I'd be happy to answer questions or hear comments for a few minutes anyway. Yes, Darcy.
I want to know, I mean, well, there's two things. One is riding around the circuit. I did that the other day because I kind of was inspired by your idea. And I thought, I'll do that and write. And I went around a couple of times, but they made me get off at Friday Harbor. So apparently you can't stay on anymore. They wanted to empty the whole boat.
Well, they let me stay on.
It was the only.
Maybe you
years
need to be the new writer and resident.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
can't
That's
stay
right, maybe I
on.
will.
They would, they pretty much always asked me, are you staying on? And of
Yeah.
course, I was writing 2, sometimes 3 times a week. So people, soon got to know me.
Yeah,
And if they
yeah.
saw me there, and they would ask, are you staying on? They didn't ask me to get off.
Well, what I was curious about is, if you had this little tent thing saying writer in residence,
Yeah.
I'm really curious as to what kinds of responses you got from people, because it's not something you see every day.
Right, yeah. Well, I was the first on the Washington State ferries, and I've ridden on a lot of other ferries because I just love them, and I've never seen it anywhere else either. Well, it ran the gamut. There would be people who would walk by and wouldn't even look. I don't know if they saw the sign and thought, oh, I don't want to make eye contact. There would be people who would walk by and they'd look at it, and or they'd be walking, all of a sudden they'd stop and look back at the sign. There were a good number of people who stopped and said, "Whoa, what is this? What is a writer in residence?" And probably at least half of those, if not a higher percentage, were writers themselves. And without exception, they all thought it was really cool. And but whenever people did stop and talk, they wanted to know what I was doing, and at that point I was I just really did a lot of rough drafting of pieces, and I also did a lot of reading, and at that point I couldn't really say what it was for sure that any of it was going to be, but I would talk about being compelled to do this out of my concern for the Salish Sea and climate change, and except during the height of the summer season, many people who rode the ferry were locals, and so they knew what I was talking about. But mostly it was just curiosity and excitement and enthusiasm about what I was doing. And there were some people who offered help, or they would recommend a book, or now I'm blanking out on the man's name who lives on the west side of San Juan Island and has the microphones. Veers, I think is his last name, and he's a professor at some university, and he offered to send me all kinds of scientific papers, and was really interested in sharing information with me. So yeah, it kind of ran the gamut. Linda.
Well, I know you had planned on helping the program continue with other writers in residence,
Yeah.
and then COVID came along. Are you envisioning it picking up again? And is there a process for, you'll choose someone?
Yeah, well, there actually was a process. my term ended in August of 2019, and in the spring of 2019, I put out a call through, my various circles for people to apply to be the next writer in residence. And about a dozen people responded to that. And I first had checked with my contact in the state ferries, say, could we keep going with this? And they said, fine. And I just asked people who were applying to, tell me a little bit about their writing and why they were interested in doing it, how they envisioned doing it. Not that there was any requirement that they do it in any certain way, but, just as a way to kind of get a feel for, would this person be a good match? And so then I narrowed it down to 3, and I took those 3 applications anonymously to my writing group and asked them to rank them too. And we all were in agreement, and selected Liz Smith from San Juan Island, who is a documentary filmmaker and producer. And she worked on the film of, I think it was National Geographic did a documentary of the 10 years since the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And she also was a producer for a film that is just coming out on Netflix called Youth v. Gov. And I actually have an essay about that. And this is the 20-some youth plaintiffs who are suing the federal government for not assuring access to clean air and water. And they've made a film. The case has not been settled. It's been appealed and denied and appealed and denied and appealed. I suspect it will go to the Supreme Court at some point. But they did do a documentary film. And so Liz was one of the producers for that. She lives right here on right over there on San Juan Island. And she started in August of 2019, and then, in March of 2020, nobody was sitting in the cabin riding around. And so we've just decided she's still the writer in residence. I'm hoping maybe she can, this summer do it, or at least do this spring and summer, and we'll then put out a call for someone else. So keep your ears open. I'll get the word out.
We have a question from Jonathan. Any Native American influences on your writing?
Well, hand in hand with my study of the Salish Sea has been a growing concern and interest in Indigenous rights and the history here. And, those of you who spend any time on the Tilikum, there are those fantastic black and white photographs of Coast Salish peoples. And I spent a lot of time looking at those and reading the descriptions of those. Most of the ferries now have names that are Coast Salish, Strait Salish words. And some of the whales are now there's collaboration with the tribes to name some of the whales with Strait Salish names like Haishka. And the actual renaming of the Salish, or naming the Salish Sea, I learned a lot about the tribe's involvement with that. So, it's hard to separate those out, but certainly it was a part of the research and learning that I was doing, and that I was woefully ignorant about and still have so much to learn.
I have a question.
Yes.
I was at Madrona Point today and thinking about some of this for the Spanish Sea. And I noticed there was only about 4 of those orange starfish. And I remember years ago going to that same dock and seeing the orange and purple.
Yeah.
And, it just hit me, our wildlife.
Yeah.
And then I thought, we're getting more and more people here. And, you know, how do we find some balance between overpopulation? We want our people to be here, you know, we had the COVID, we want people, and protecting our enemies.
You're sitting next to somebody who's worked hard to keep.
Sure, Anita, yes. In fact, I saw you out there at what is the island right there? Indian Island.
That's another one that needs the name change.
At least it's not Jack on it.
I did want to say, I mean, there's changes all the time, but in terms of this, particularly the sea stars, they might not be in the exact spot that you saw them, but the sea stars have returned, of course, to the island. They're hundreds and hundreds of them.
Yeah, yeah, that happened during the time I was working on this. I remember learning about that, and I think you may have told me that too, that day that we happened to see each other there at Indian Island.
Yeah, they did have a disease that wiped them out.
Right, the wasting disease.
Thought that they were going extinct, or using that word, but kept them back, and a lot of them were weird. The sea stars didn't come back, but the common vascular stars. So
Right, yeah, yeah. Great, yes, thank you.
but what's happening to all of our life, right?
Seems like the kelp, there's not as much kelp as I remember there used to be when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Those big huge bull kelps, you know, the big long ones with the,
Yeah.
we used to cut the tops off and play them like a trumpet.
Yeah, I think there's some work just starting now about kelp and what's happening.
You can ask Amanda Swinimer about it. Next, 2 Sundays from now. She's all over.
Oh, yeah.
She'll be visiting
Oh,
us.
that's right.
Good. Well, I can see people are starting to feel the effects of the cold. I have one request to ask. I use my copy, my book, as my guest book at events. So if you all would just sign your name, you don't have to write anything else. But then I have this record of who all was here, and then if any of you want me to autograph books, I'm happy to do that too. But I'm going to start this over here and just have you pass it around. And
Thank you, Iris.
sure, thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging Jenny. Because of Jenny, you're here. Jenny Darvos has been super about collaborating on having authors at the library. So many thanks to you, Jenny. And also thank you for opening with the land acknowledgement. It's something I've been struggling with, crafting one that's sincere, not rote, just sort of checking the box, and it's hard. So I appreciate the effort you took to do that.
You're welcome.
And also, thank you for your comments about, who was it who said I would have written less if I'd had more time?
It's been attributed to a number of people.
It has, yeah.
Yeah.
But, I think your comments about writing, something flash fiction, not or nonfiction,
Yeah.
but something smaller, more condensed that's actually gets to the point. It's, resonated with me. So,
Yeah.
any
Iris,
other
you're
comments?
also part of the Lit Fest, right? Coming up, you'll be, are you a panelist on the Lit
No, I'm not a
Fest?
panelist. I'll be on the Lit Walk. So the Orcas Island Lit Fest is returning this year. Fantastic festival for readers is really who it's for. And there will be panels on Saturday, the 3rd of June, or 4th of June, I think. And Friday night, the 3rd, there will be a lit walk through town. There will be authors reading at various places, and I'll be one of those. I don't know where. And Darville's will staff the book fair at the Lit Fest, and they haven't listed on their website yet all of the authors who are going to be here, but they always bring in interesting people. And
One of them had to leave, I guess, but Susan Slavin is gonna be.
she'll be on the
She's reading
Lit
one of the
Walk.
panels, I think. Or she
I think she's on the walk. I don't know. I I was on the board for the first 2 years, but I'm not anymore, so I'm just getting my news from the website like everybody else. Yeah.
Is that all, local authors or?
No,
no.
no, they're national, international, yeah.
Is there time for another quick question? So when you were with the sign saying artist in residence, and you have people stop and talk to you, was that hard to be interrupting your writing, or was that stimulating, or, you know, all of you?
Yeah, most of the time it was kind of a nice little break, because I would ride anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. And, that is just a long time to be, for me anyway, to be riding. So I often was glad to have a little interruption. And, say pretty much without exception, people who stopped to chat, and when they found out what I was doing, they were really respectful. And they knew that it wouldn't be helpful to me if they sat around, sat down across from me at the table and, oh, well, let's just ride together. That sort of thing didn't happen. So it was just kind of a nice break, and you never knew who somebody might be and what they might bring to conversation.
Do you feel like the very people wanted you to sort of a mask on, sort of like was there some like PR spit to this? Because I feel kind of like it was, so, like you're taking the fairy level for next first year.
Yeah, well, in my proposal, I said that, one, I would retain total control of what I wrote. Two, that my intention was not to have my writing be promoting fairy ridership. So I felt like I was making it clear from the very beginning that, this was not going to be a tourism bureau PR. Amtrak has writers in residence, and they do require, I don't know what they're doing now, but what I've read about is that, they do expect people to write about riding on the train.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to have that expectation or requirement. But anybody who doesn't live around here that I talk to about this, they just kind of swoon when I say I was a writer in residence on the ferry. Who knows what their image is, but
Weeks,
Yeah.
it's like the fairies like that. Part of the team.
yeah. And the crew were great. Either they ignored me or humored me or befriended me, So it was
Great.
great.
The folks online would like to have their names added to your book as well.
Oh my gosh, yes, okay, thank you.
Writing them down.
Let them know, I will get them. They will be on the Orcas page. That's great, thank you.
That was Jonathan's idea. Thank you, Jonathan.
Is that Jonathan White?
Jonathan Betts.
Oh, Jonathan Betzel, okay, good, a friend from Seattle.
You just did?
Bye, Jonathan.
All right, bye everybody, thanks, thank back there, thanks for coming out.
Oh, thank you. Oh, appreciate hearing that. Sure. Yeah, great. I'm so glad you were here.